to the RunRX podcast, where we talk about all things running. As many runners know, it's 90% mental. So join Coach Valerie and Coach Caroline as we go through the mental side of running.
Welcome back to the RunRX podcast. I'm your host, Coach Caroline, and I'm here with Coach Valerie. Coach, we've been talking recently about injuries and how it affects our running, but you brought up some really good things around that recently in our conversation. Can you tell our podcast listeners what we were talking about and what you meant by how it affects our running?
Sure. So, most of the time when you get a running injury or, let's go, I'll start off with my husband. He has it's called a heel spur. So it's like a calcium deposit on the back of your heel. Well, since it bothers him, he puts all of his weight on his other side, even when he's standing. So when he's standing, when he's walking, and of course I can see it. And then he'll always say, I really just feel it when I run. So he, we'll blame it on the running. And so I've been working on him to, when he's standing, start putting weight on both feet. Like really, and it's interesting how you're standing and you're walking will also affect your running. Even though the injury might have happened during the running, you start to adapt other movements because of the injury without even really realizing it. And all of a sudden you're walking and you're putting more weight on one side than the other. And then people will come to me when they're injured and say, oh, well, I have one hip that doesn't work right, or my glutes aren't firing. I hear this all the time. My glutes aren't firing. My hip is off. And really, it's not at all. It's really just that your pattern of movement is imbalanced. And when we start, that's the fun part too with us at RunRX, we start with standing, because in running, you're standing on one foot, hopefully a very short period of time, but we've got to start you with just your stance, your line. How are you holding yourself in just when you stand? And then how are you holding yourself when you're on one leg? And so many runners don't practice that. We don't practice standing.
Right.
And then, people will say to me, oh my gosh, I don't have any balance, or, oh, I'm so tight on this one side. And I'm like, it's like you already know the things you should be working on, but you're not really doing anything to change that. So awareness is great. It's great to know that you have some hip issues. Now, what are we doing about it? And so that's what's so amazing is when you start to put in balance work into your practice, however you want to call it. And for us, when you come into RunRX and you do the immersion, we spend the whole first month with you realigning you. What we're doing is really helping you with standing, sitting, walking, and running, to be honest, because all of those things are related. And even just your basic strength exercises. What's amazing is you get recommended all the time things like you should strengthen your core, you should strengthen your, and then here's 18 exercises.
I love that.
And it's like, okay, I don't have 3 hours to do that. So we've broken it down to these little 5-minute practices where the focus is on how you're standing. Where's your body weight? How are you aligning yourself? And these are things that honestly, it's amazing how it works into how you're sitting, like I said, how you're standing, how you're walking. And if I'm out of an injury, I'm out with an injury, what am I still doing? I'm still sitting, I'm still standing, I'm still walking, right? So I tell people it's amazing what you're working on when you work on your running is going to help you in all of your movement. And maybe you didn't even realize it, that you were, doing that. And then someone will, because we don't really, it's really funny if you're in a running group and you've been around runners for a long time, right? We all kind of know people by their gait, right? You start to be like, oh, Roger with the old shuffle, sidestep. And it's like, well, let's not let Roger stay like that. Let's get his line up a little bit. So we have a lot of people. Another good example is an older man that came into the, if you're listening, Jen, it came in the membership and he's in his 60s. And in the beginning, honestly, his head was so far forward, and it's from age, it's from sitting in front of a computer, it's from just years of, posture related issues. He spent the last couple of years working, still running and working on his line. And I mean, it's really, he can run faster, he can run longer, but he can feel the difference even in his daily life of walking. And we don't even realize that we're, how out of alignment we are. And that's a strange word to use, alignment, but we talk about being in line all the time in our practice. And like I said, people come in and they're blaming things like, they're, well, I don't know, I have a bad knee. We hear I have a bad knee, or I have a bad hip, or I have this. And it's like, well, let's see how we can work around that. And it's amazing, right? You've seen this a lot. When we start working on your line and even like self-care, right? We hear this a lot. My calf is so tight. My calf is so tight. My calf hurts when I run. And then I'll have you roll your shoulder and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Now my calf doesn't hurt so much.
Yeah. It's amazing sometimes when that happens. I'm amazed at how eye-opening it can be when I work with you all the time, right? And I do like get the roller balls out and I'll start doing my neck and I'll go down in between my shoulder blades and I'll feel it pulling on like my IT band. Like I can feel it.
Right.
And releasing it. And I'm like, oh my God. You don't realize, guys, how it's all connected until you start like really getting in there and connecting the dots and feeling the feelings that you're afraid of. Because isn't that a lot of it?
I will say this because there is a lot of pushback in the community itself of runners about, oh, Valerie, I hear this all the time. Let people be. Let them just run how they run. Why do you want to take people and try to change? Running is natural, right? We should all just be just running perfectly, kind of. And I'm like, really? Because when you watch people, they don't look like they're that comfortable sometimes. You can see when someone's completely got terrible posture. You can see it.
Right. Yeah.
You can see their head is forward. You can see their back is bent. And, to be honest, that's not being very nice to your body. So it's not about thinking, oh, well, I'm changing you. No, you're making yourself better. And let me just sidetrack for a second, because Caroline comes to a gym where I coach. So I coach CrossFit classes at a gym. And we have the beginners, the older people. So we are movement limited, in a positive way. Like we're still moving. We're all in our 50s and we're still doing the movement. And it's so much more important even for us to do the movement correctly, because when you get injured at our age, it takes even longer to come back. And we noticed like one guy, he doesn't have the range of motion yet to be able to do a full squat. And he kept lifting one foot because he's trying to his knee was hurting. So he was putting all of his weight on the other leg, lifting his heel up basically, and then barely sitting back. And it was like, why would I let someone do that? Of course not. So we got a box out, had him sit, put his feet where they're supposed to be, planted on the ground, holding his chest up, and have him using his glute muscles to get up and down and his core. So first he has to learn how to do the movement. If I just let him squat that way, can you imagine what's going to happen over time? His other hip's going to hurt, his knee's going to hurt. So just imagine, guys, a lot of you guys do that in your running without realizing, because you're trying to, get off the injury or offset. And that's the best part about, one, working on your line, but second, letting me watch you, sending me your video check-ins, letting me see your movement. It's amazing how much faster you'll correct, and then you'll correct your other movements as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, though, what would you recommend in the posture? I want to kind of get back to the posture really fast, because it does affect your whole body. Like Jim was saying, it affects you everywhere. So what would you do? Just one simple thing. Is it the ready stance that you would have? And we've got that on all of our channels. You can just search ready stance. Would you work on that ready stance like when I'm at work, when I'm standing in front of,
When you're standing.
Yeah.
Like it's really funny. We do group pictures a lot, and I know you guys do this too. So after a workout, after a run, everybody gets together, group picture. And I will watch how people stand in their group picture, and say someone has a hip thing. you will watch, just even in their picture, they've already shifted their weight to their other hip and their leg is out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll point it out and I'm like, there's your right hip pain during your run right there. You know, it's amazing that once you start to focus on, we call it ready stance. Anyone that's played sports knows what ready stance is. And a lot of it is learning to keep your knees bent when you're standing. It's so telling how much you lock your knee joints with no awareness. You have zero awareness you're doing it. It's just something you've always done. And then you're walking with your hip flexors. You're walking with the wrong muscles, really. And you start to correct movement patterns. You start using your posterior chain, your hamstrings, your glutes, what you're supposed to be using. I'm telling you, it's worth putting yourself through the awkwardness of the beginning of the practice, because everyone says to me, I feel so strange.
Yeah.
Just even standing here, I feel strange. I'm like, good. That's a good thing. That means you're reconnecting with yourself and where you are in space. We don't even realize we're sitting with poor posture or standing there with our hip jutted out. And then later you're like, oh, I have IT band pain. I'm sure it's from running.
Yeah. And that's what you were saying is like every sport has it. And I kind of want to bring that back, guys. The ready stance in running is the same as the ready stance in football or even martial arts. And the point of it is you do have to bend your knees, right? And you do have to make sure that your foot is, I'm not going to say flat, but it's all on the ground, but the ball of your foot is what holding your weight. Why? So that you can move. If I'm a football player, I need to be able to have fast feet and spring into running, right? I need to be a runner. If I'm in martial arts, I need to be able to kick, right? And stand on one leg. Sounds familiar, right? Stand on one leg and kick. Well, you can't do that if you're flat footed with your knees locked. And so I think you need to kind of start looking at where that ready stance is in your life. And that's what we're trying to also bring back when I'm thinking about my injury. How do I stand when I'm cooking food? How do I stand when I'm at my desk? How am I standing if I'm in a grocery line? Or I was waiting at the Apple store yesterday to get my phone fixed. Are you sitting in your hip? Are you standing there lock-kneed? Really become aware of that, because that's where I think these injuries are coming from, or that's where you're offsetting that injury and making it worse by putting more pressure on that other side. Does that sound right?
Right. It's mainly like having awareness, right?
Yes.
Because we really, if someone took a picture of you and your legs were locked and you were staring down at your phone with your head, you would immediately be like, oh my gosh. And so it's more about just being more aware of when you're standing, when you're sitting, and you start realizing wow, I could lift my chest up a little open. And then guys, this is the best part, right? In the beginning, you're overthinking.
Right.
People tell me all the time how awkward it is to bend their knees. And when I do running clinics and I can actually work with you for hours at a time, and anyone that's been to one of my clinics, they're like, oh my gosh, all she says is bend your knees for hours on end. And as I watch people just immediately go back to that extension, that knee extension is powerful. So that's the thing. It's you start with little things, I'm standing, I'm going to focus on for just a second, bending my knees, but not just bending your knees, guys, because it's not a squat. You want to feel like your upper body's lifted. How can I hold my upper body lifted and my knees bent? And that is the start of everything. And that's the fun. So there you go. Take that ready stance and try it today the next time you're standing around.
And guys, if you ever have any questions for Coach Valerie or even myself with mindset or training, you can reach out to us at support@runrx.fit. That's support@runrx.fit. And just ask us a question that we'll answer on the podcast. We would love to. We can do deep dive videos for our YouTube channel. We are here to help you in whatever way we can. We would love to have you work with us. But if you can't, we get it. People are in different places in their running careers and in their journey, and we're here to meet you where you are. So please feel free to reach out to us. Share this podcast podcast with a friend. Give us a 5-star review and tell other people why you love us so that they can find us too. And we will talk to you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us on the RunRX podcast. If you'd like to know more, join us at www.runrx.fit. And if you have additional questions that you'd like answered on the podcast, email us at support@runrx.fit.